And we are go. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is, in fact, IDAGIO, Song and Beyond, the partnership with the Hampson Foundation. I'm Thomas Hampson. Welcome to a wonderful new year. I'm not being facetious. We must look at it as wonderful. We must keep our faces towards the sun and get through this awful, awful time that we're still obvious across the globe mired in. I do not want to be glib about that. But one of the nice things, one of the opportunities we have is to concentrate on something else for an hour, hour and a half. And that's what we're going to do tonight. And his name is Franz Schubert. Joining me tonight is Susan Youens, Professor, Dr. Susan Youens, and the most distinguished Esquire, and Dr. Professor, distinguished, as I was introduced once, the extinguished person, but actually you're the distinguished person, Graham Johnson, one of the great authors of everything known about Schubert. The two of you have changed the landscape of Schubert knowledge, musicology, historiography, everything. And it's such a pleasure to have you here. Before we get into our discussion, I just want to, again, welcome you back. IDAGIO and Hampson Foundation, the Song and Beyond Tuesdays are intact. We look forward to seeing you here every Tuesday. Just as a glimpse, moving forward into February, we will be celebrating African American History Month through the great canon of African American song and artists of today and song of yesteryear. It's going to be very fun. However, January is Schubert month. Schubert was born on January 31st, 1797. Did I get that right, guys?
Absolutely.
I love it. Now, if you see them shaking their wildly heads, you realize I'm going to correct something. Anyway, this is great fun. And we're going to celebrate his birthday, but more importantly, we have so many wonderful events here in Europe, and especially centered around the Schubert Week that the Boulez Saal at the Barenboim Said Academy instituted 4 years ago, and invited me 4 years ago to curate this wonderful experiment and celebration of Schubert songs, which I gladly accepted. It was born out of a idealism and passion by Daniel Barenboim, especially in his work and friendship with Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau, to, as quickly as possible, again, sing all of Franz Schubert's songs in recitals, specifically the Boulez Saal, in as much as possible, over the shortest amount of time possible. That time frame has, of course, been shifting about due to various calendars and COVIDs and so forth. But we have, in fact, I know that we're well half through all of the songs in public recitals. The Schubert Week centers around a learning experience of young singers who would like to be young leader singers, and who obviously are going to be bathed in Schubert for a week and study with me and 2 or 3 other professors, especially pianists, Hartmut Höll, Wolfram Rieger, Malcolm Martineau was there, Gerald Huber. They have master classes with them during the day. Then in the evening, we have what we call fellows of our program, and it is a cooperation with the Lied Academy in Heidelberg. I forgot to mention that. And they have been in our orbit for a little bit longer. And in fact, they are being trusted with a half of a Liederabend every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday night. 2 singers per evening, which is very exciting. Now, the really great news of all this for our Schubert enthusiasts is that all Tuesdays of January, Beyond Song, will be dedicated to Schubert. I'll tell you the guests for next week a little bit later. But the Schubert Week at the Boulez Saal, we saw all of this disaster coming, and we spent a great deal of effort and time and preparation to make, regardless of what shutdown we're in Berlin, the Schubert Week possible. It will be, in fact, all digital, all week. We will have no public, but we will go forward as if. We have made some wonderful program note video kinds of entrances to the thing. You will have a host every night from the 18th to the 24th, every night at 8 o'clock Central European time is a recital of Schubert. The kids, me, some colleagues on the weekend, and Friday, Saturday, and Sunday afternoon are public master classes culminating, well, the 2 days, Friday and Saturday, with public master classes with the students that have been matriculating for the week, also in Schubert repertoire. It's all Schubert repertoire. What am I talking about? And on Sunday afternoon will be a live, as we call it in German, Abschlusskonzert, a final concert where they themselves will sing about 10 or 15 minutes, each of them, of songs that they've been working on and digesting. And then the evening closes at 8 o'clock again in the evening, 20 o'clock over here with, I've forgotten who it is, but it's a wonderful soprano. I have to look up her name. Oh, forgive me. Anyway, 18 to 24 January this month, it's wall to wall, night to night, Schubert. I don't think there's any other place on the planet that is singing this many Schubert songs in an 8-day period. And may I tell you, I have been through the programs. I promise you there are exactly 2 repeats of songs. And they are by 2 different kinds of singers with 3 days in between them. So we are talking about a huge amount of repertoire. We will probably put this up on the Hampson Foundation a little bit later. Certainly you can see everything you want to see about it on the Boulez Saal. I am making the Schubert Month and the Hampson Beyond Song partnership with them all part of this Schubert orbit. So we have Boulez Saal, we have Heidelberg Lied Academy, we have all these wonderful young singers. And what is so great is that I can't actually invite all of the people I would like to invite to the Schubert week to talk or be with our public. And actually the digital arena allows me to have these wonderful conversations. And I promise you, I'm going to back out of this pretty soon and let you really hear from perhaps people you've only read about, perhaps people you've only glanced at a book or an article written by and recognized as the greatest authorities on Schubert songs and things about Schubert's lives that we have today. And that are 2 of those people are graciously with me tonight, which I can call to my great honor, friends and colleagues. And so without much ado, why don't we get into things Schubert? So who wants to give us some of the highlights of facts? So he lived only 31 years. He wrote over, how many songs did he write? 600 and?
It depends if you count the fragments, and it depends if you count the ensemble songs. Actually, it's over 700 if you take all the vocal works with piano.
Can you imagine? 700 songs in what time frame? What year is his first song?
1811, 1810, 1811 until 1828. So we have 70 years.
I should have made this like Jeopardy for 500, because I can see both of you answering at the same time. It's fantastic.
Could I consult a friend in Susan Youens? That would be the best.
No, that's me. Actually, I'm just going to, if you can, ladies and gentlemen, you can see behind me, I'm just going to reach back here and grab a hold of the Bible for Schubert, which is Graham's 3-volume tome, which I know, Susan, you're a big fan of too, even though you are very graciously and effusively thanked for your, I can't imagine, unbelievable participation and necessary participation.
Graham's volumes and Graham's recordings are a ne plus ultra enterprise. They really are. And
you know what I think, Susan?
My work wouldn't be possible without everything that Graham has done before me.
Well, that's lovely, Susan, but I just think that one has to know, and this includes making wonderful compliments gratefully received, that I believe that by his very nature, Schubert songs you're never going to have a definitive, unbetterable performance of a Schubert song.
I agree. And in fact, we want to challenge our next generations to in fact know that Schubert seen through the eyes of various epochs is the most important and wonderful, fascinating world to Schubert that I know.
He is unreachable, and there are certain songs in particular which will never ever, because we are human beings and not gods, will never ever achieve the actual performance that the music is worth. Let me put it that way. So actually, we're all about
except for volume 14. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen.
what-
It's a little bit of an inside joke. That's I'm just having some fun with Graham. That was I actually got invited to this mammoth project, and I'm so grateful. At the time, I remember being swamped with other things and rolled my eyes and said, "Of course I'm going to do this. Oh my God, when am I going to learn all this stuff?" And we had a good and raucous and very productive time, and I'm very proud of the recording. But anyway, I'm just teasing Graham. It's a monumental project.
All these things, and this includes also the really greatest Schubert singers like Fischer-Dieskau. And one has the impression with people who are of the golden age like that some of their performances could never possibly be bettered in human time. But the answer is that the music always remains above as an aspiration. And there's never anything that can be said to be absolutely right and absolutely definitive, any more than anybody can say that they've done King Lear for all time and the only King Lear ever. There are going to be other people who find other things in it.
I have an exception to that.
Yeah.
I had a student once who was very bright, musically very gifted. He's now the principal oboist with the New York Phil. And he didn't think that music theory or music history were necessary at all. So he would sit in the back of the room for these required courses and glower fiercely until I was introducing Schubert songs, this in a survey course. And I played Graham Johnson's and Anthony Rolfe Johnson's performance of Das Fischers Liebesglück. And this young man sat bolt upright and said, "Play it again." So I smiled and I played it again. And then he said, "Play it again. I have to hear it again." And at the end of the class, he had to take my CD off with him. And I have used that performance to make more converts to Schubert Lieder than I can begin to say. Ditto the lovely performance, the scary, terrifying performance of Gruppe aus dem Tartarus with you two.
But I would say that that performance was only possible because I had grown up in my earlier 20s with the 78 of Karl Erb, whose ethereal performance of that song actually a tone higher than the original, so that the oscillations of an octave would go to a B rather than an A. He had a way of rubato and freedom in that song. And I'd heard such a lot about him from Gerald Moore as being an amazing artist, a very problematic and unusual figure, the first Palestrina, as Tom will know, in the Pfitzner opera. And actually, this is how we stand on each other's shoulders as we go and do things. And the certain thing is that a great performance will come from someone who does certain things better than our beloved and late friend Tony did. And I did, and it's inevitable, and it's to be welcomed, and it's to be embraced. But that's the way things go. It's an evolution. Song performance is a kind of evolution, and we all have a little role to play as we go along. I mean, I don't know, for example, Susan, to return the compliment graciously as I may to you, in anybody writing about Winterreise is in your debt for that book published on the cycle, because that set a tone, and it set a type of detail, and it is, it's the first of your books that I read, and I was enslaved by it from the very beginning. So, lots of us have written about Winterreise since then, but it really goes back to the type of study that you did, which was quite new in that kind of detail, may I say. There's a lot of other German musicology that is very earnest and very detailed and from earlier years, but nothing as ravishing as what you proposed in that book. So.
Absolutely true.
I'm happy.
It is my Bible, Talmud. It is your book on retracing the steps is the name of it. Susan Youens, Winterreise. If you're interested in Winterreise, you must have this book. Anyway, Susan, we need to talk about the German translation. It needs to be in German. I have too many young German scholars who don't know this book because they won't read English. So we need to get a German. So let's look. We're talking about Schubert. We're talking about a very short life by any definition. You know, very often in a class when somebody sings a song that is obviously sad or happy, I may still actually say, okay, happy song or sad song, and you always get this sort of wistful. Well, maybe it's a. So let me ask you, Schubert, happy life? Sad life, tragic, pensive, worthwhile, fulfilled. How did he feel about his life?
That's
Susan?
Well, he's bound at some level to have felt fulfilled because he had music coming out of every pore. And he was able to set it down on paper. And it was music that looks beyond its own time in certain respects. Right now, I'm completely fascinated by his one solo lead setting of Grillparzer. Bertes Lied in der Nacht. And that is a futuristic song. In fact, it was so peering around the corner into the future that when it was first published by Diabelli, well after Schubert's death, Diabelli either didn't get it or didn't think that the public would buy something with that many radical musical characteristics. And so he completely expunged all of the futuristic aspects of it from the first edition. But I look at it now, in my old age, I didn't think much of it when I was younger. But now the blinkers are off and I can see things in the song that I never saw before because I was too young and stupid. And I'm having the greatest time delving into it.
What's the title?
Bertes Lied in der Nacht.
Yeah, right. Bertes Lied in der Nacht. Yeah. Well,
can I say?
Thank you. I wanted to ask you. I want you to answer the same question. I want to just put a little edge on it, and that is that what would Schubert have been like if he'd even lived to be 50, like Berg and Gershwin and Mahler?
Well, first of all, I want to say that there were certain elements of Schubert's life that we can feel very sorry about. The fact that he didn't ever have a partner, that as far as we know it, that no one felt that he was the special one. Certainly a lot of people felt he was the special one musically, but in terms of personally, there was nobody who I think loved him as much as he might have loved them. And this is to go quite apart from all the level of who it might have been that he truly loved, because that's up for many decades of heated discussion. But one thing is true, and I think somebody like Brahms commented on it, that he had the key to a garden in which no other composer was able to play. A heavenly kingdom that he entered every morning at about 8 o'clock and stayed there until lunchtime, disporting himself. And if you can imagine the joy that we feel when we listen to the greatest Schubert songs, what must it have felt in sensual terms to feel that music traveling through the body and onto paper? We cannot have the slightest idea of the depth of fulfillment, excitement, the feeling of not only seeing the beauty, but conjuring it yourself and having the technique and musical wherewithal to capture it and put it fast on the page. Any of us have known what it is to write a nice sentence or to do a good recording, but to actually feel at the end of the day that you've composed a string quintet and just put it in a drawer and never even hear it performed in your lifetime means that the pleasure in composing that piece was so powerfully compensatory for the money, the fame, the sexual adventures. I don't think that very many people know what it is, even if you're not talking about fame and will other people love this and will my name be immortal, never mind that. The feeling of hearing that music in your ears for the first time and feeling the process of it going onto the paper. I mean, obviously every great composer feels this. Beethoven felt it, Mozart felt it. But in the case of Schubert, who had so little else apart from a group of friends who were nice enough, who were jovial, who were companionable, but he had no intimate life that we know of. No life where he got a sense of unhappy in his family. He had a bad relationship with his father. You know, I tell you that if you experienced what Schubert felt almost every day of the week of his life, again and again, you might be prepared to give up a little bit of the other stuff.
Well put. But listen, that I think that is a fact that our public doesn't maybe get, or there's rumors about it. What is actually, how much of Schubert's music in all of his genres did he actually, I mean, without getting too detailed, but I mean, the string quartets, did he hear any of them? The symphonies, did he hear any of them? How many operas did he compose? I mean, how many songs, if you count them all up, probably he heard, what, 35 songs?
No more than that, I think.
Okay.
I think about 100, I think.
Okay.
But I mean, there were performances that we don't know about in private.
Right.
There were certain public performances. We certainly know all about the public performances. And actually, other singers took them up. The interesting thing was, you know, that he was not nearly as small and unknown as a part of his modesty would suggest to us. He had 200 songs in print from every single publisher in Vienna. He was busy proofreading. There were many performances of songs in Vienna by singers that he didn't even have close connections to. So it wasn't only a friendship circle. In 1820,
he was beginning to gain adherence outside of Austria by the time he died. So now his
But
friends,
even in Vienna in 1822, there was a huge article in the Modezeitung, in that famous Wiener Zeitschrift für Theater, Mode, Literatur und Kunst und so weiter, which said Blick über Schubert's Lieder. And it was a sort of an incredible paean of praise at the top of the article about Schubert's greatness as a song composer, 1822. That's before the Schöne Müllerin or Winterreise. And so in a way, I sometimes feel that his lack of self-esteem, his lack of ability to push himself, his lack of banging on about his own greatness, his lack of narcissism, somehow has affected our vision of him, that with writing the same material with a different personality, and of course, if he'd been a different personality, he wouldn't have written the same material, he actually could have he could have garnered a much greater public profile and public success. But the fact of the matter, he was shy, he was retiring, and he had certain, I think, very deep from childhood on issues of self-esteem.
What strikes me in this, because we keep talking about song, we talk about his praise as a songwriter, but song as a topic or as a genre was extremely new. Was that also why, or in this form? I mean, yes, there's been songs before that, but I mean, we all like to say Schubert's the muse, and Schubert is the first, song conceptus as we talk about song today, and all of that. Where did this come from? Why song with Schubert? Was he was just fascinated with text, or fascinated with ideas in word, and wanted to write songs, or was he inspired by Beethoven on that level? Even though Beethoven is not so much known as a song composer, as it were.
He wrote quite enough songs to discomfort Schubert, and particularly the 1816 An die Ferne Geliebte knocked Schubert for six. Those 6 songs knocked him for 6, and actually affected, I think, a lot of his search for cycle from then on. But I think what.
But where did Erlkönig come from? And Gretchen am Spinnrad. I mean, I like to describe Schubert very often as the first one that took the external world, or the extra musical world, and gave us hearable evidence of an external context in which deep psychology is apparent. That it's always about the personal dilemma, but in the context of something external that no one had ever done musically. Does that make sense? Does that work for you guys?
Well, for me, it makes perfect sense. But I think that the main thing that you have to know about Schubert is that he had this incredible gift for word, for text, and to be able to translate text and poetry into musical analogues that have made immediate sense. He was one of the very few geniuses, alongside Schumann and Wolf and a handful of other people, who have this relationship to words. But at the same time, and it's something that the early critics right into the 20th century ignored, he was a master composer pur sang, which is to say that if he'd never written a song at all, his skill in orchestration, his skill in piano writing, his skill in everything else was of a transcendental kind. And it's just a piece of historical luck that this type of gifted musician should also have this verbal transcendental connection. I don't know what Susan thinks about that, but I think it's just the coming together of great composer in any case, plus the talent with words.
Well,
Susan, jump.
This brings me to one of the many myths about Schubert that I find utterly maddening. And it's a consequence, I think, of his own modesty. This is people saying, A, he had terrible taste in poetry, which is not true.
No.
And B, as Carolina Pichler once wrote about him, there wasn't really an intellect there. Oh my God, he was such an intellectual genius. And when you delve into his music, you discover there that he understood the issues in the outside world that were under a microscope in the poem, and that he could find musical analogs for those issues in such a way that the song is both about music, pure music, and about a certain interpretation of the words. And I think he's one of the first to understand that poetry often has as many layers as an onion and can produce some of the same bitter tears. So any musical setting is a very special kind of transcription where you eliminate certain shades of the poem and stress those, bring to the fore those that you think are most crucial. Or in the case of certain poems, you turn it into a paradox and a problem. Performers can interpret a song to say one thing, and another set of performers can take the same words, the same music, and inflect it to do something different.
Just to wrap up, just back to this, what he heard. Okay, so more songs were heard than probably think people have. With a string, did he hear the string quartets?
As far as I know, I don't think there was a performance of a string quartet in public, either. But certainly things would have been played within the circle. I think, okay. Although his light was hid under a bushel in many, many respects in terms of his operas. He heard one or two of his operas performed, but the real big ones that he really worked hard on, which are Alfonso and Estrella and Fierabras, he never heard. He tried very hard to get them performed. But in a sense, I think his songwriting became, in a way, something that hindered his progress with the public, because he was so wonderfully great at it that it obscured his other geniuses or aspects of his genius. And I think
what about the piano? What about the piano sonatas?
Well, the piano sonatas took years and years and years to be appreciated for the masterpieces that they absolutely are. I mean, if somebody like Schnabel, who is a relatively recent person from the 1920s and 30s, is considered to be the great pioneer of the Schubert piano sonatas, in a sense, this is one of the strange things. People like George Bernard Shaw and other people continually thought that if you are a songwriter, you are a slightly fey salon creature without the ability actually to hold your own on the bigger fields. Take the figure Ronaldo Hahn, who was perhaps exactly that, a genius at the song world and absolutely exquisite, but came to grief when he tried perhaps bigger pieces. In Schubert's case,
but he was the first music director of the Salzburg Festival. Well, thank you very much. He was a Mozart expert, and I didn't realize that until a couple of years ago, and it was just kind of extraordinary because we tend to put Ronaldo Hahn in that place, but actually in his day, in his time as a functioning musician, as it were, it was an extraordinary talent that was very treasured.
And so was Messager, and who did the first Elias. But what I'm trying to say is that in a sense, songs in the 19th century often thought to be the things that women composed. I'm sorry to say that many people, I mean, in Victorian England, Maud Valerie White, Lisa Lehman, people like this, Guy Dardelot, Amy Woodford Findon, it was fine. Songs, in a sense, were written by many men, of course, but to write symphonies, operas, string quartets, masses, and to do them so masterfully, is the reason why the songs are so great. Because they have a sense of architecture and planning and a real concept of composition. They are not dreamily composed. They are extraordinarily constructed. There is a fantastic construction about them. And that's why
I always say that the real estate of a lead is restricted, but they strike deep, and they require, I think, every bit of rigor and a different sort of rigor than the Texas-sized compositions.
But Schubert had both.
Of course he did. Of course,
but they informed both, as you've been saying, which is probably a fact that because I mean, people of singers. I mean, I don't know. I want to get into anecdotal, but you know the comment by big opera singers saying, "Oh well, he or she is probably lovely in the Schubert world." But that's not really a voice or something like that. But we don't need to go down that road. What I think would be fun, because I do want to get into some specific songs, but let's look at his songs group a little bit. What I've often said is that he wrote in so many different genres and subgenres of those, but we could name probably 4 or 5 big ones. And if he had only been known for any one of those type of songs, he would have been one of the most famous songwriters of the world. But, we have, of course, the strophic lied, which is just a rather structured versed lied. We have the through composed, we have ballads, we have what he called his drawing room operas, like Der Taucher, or my favorite piece of music, the Amphiaros. Graham loves to tell the story of me getting frustrated in our recording. In fact, I've been immortalized in his introduction of talking about I might be the only artist that has committed a flying music stand across in the Rosslyn Chapel, because the Amphiaros has a lot of subtle turns that you don't expect. Anyway, we had a good time. It's a great piece, but the ballads, the drawing room operas, he loved, it seems to me, he loved the scenic element of context. He loved to tell stories. When I mean scenic element, I mean, setting up in the big drawing room ballads, as it were, or living room opera, whatever you want to call it, miniature stage operas, which some of them really have to be put next to his stage works to really recognize how deeply thought out these are. But he loved to create places where people would have to take a journey in their own recognition of their life or of an experience in life. I don't mean to give my own lecture here, but the question is, can you name some of the genres and speak to them that you think really stand out? There is a question I was going to ask before, and that is, what was Schubert listening to? What did he love? Was Mozart being played a lot, and did he get that? I mean, I know he revered Beethoven. We know he revered Beethoven beyond all. But what was the musical life in Vienna that he was listening to, going to performances? Was it Gluck? We know, obviously, met singers from that. But was he going to string quartet concerts? Was he fascinated by did he just want to listen to all sorts of kinds of music all the time? Or was he quite, as you say, prisoner of his own creativity, if you will? Either one of you. Susan?
Well, all I can say is, it's a complicated question, because string quartet concerts, you say, I don't think there was such a thing as a string quartet concert. There were string quartets heard domestically, and there was some movement sometimes from string pieces in the Musikverein concerts, which normally, by the way, were in the middle of the day. Did you know that if you have an evening concert, it's a huge deal because of the candles, and very few people can afford the lighting. So actually, most of ordinary concerts by younger people were at lunchtime, so that you could see what was happening in the hall without a huge expense of wax.
And what I meant by concerts were just whatever opportunity a young person would have, or any person would have, to go to a musical event. Was he addicted to that? Was he active in that?
From the very beginning, he played in an orchestra in his convict school. He played the violin. Joseph von Spaun noticed his talent from that early on. There were famous composers like Haydn, who obviously were godlike for him. Mozart. Michael Haydn, for example, was a hugely esteemed person in his earlier life that we very seldom hear. As soon as he became interested in opera and was taken to see Iphigenie, of course, Gluck, enormously important. And then the other side of things were the things that he necessarily didn't hear in performance, but which he managed to study. And this, above all, many operas that he didn't actually hear, but which he played from the vocal score. And the ballads of Zumsteg, the ballad composer from Stuttgart, who actually was an enormous influence on Schubert, and who really showed him certain aspects of the ballad style that Schubert even tried to model himself, almost bar by bar, on things that were happening in the Zumsteg settings of the same words. And then there were also the extraordinary influence of people from Berlin. At that stage, Berlin was the enemy to Vienna, not only because of the Prussian and Austrian enmity, which was age-old, but because there was a sort of tyranny of intellectual lead writing presided over by the highly gifted and hugely articulate Johann Friedrich Reichardt and other people, Schulz, other people in the Berlin school, which insisted on a certain set of strophic manners and absolute consistency, economy, a sort of pristine Protestant economy versus the enormous Catholic effulgence with its Italian overtones, and Metastasio going to live there, and the Mozart operas in Italian, all that different. And Schubert's genius was that he had an omnium gatherum side to his nature, to quote Coleridge. He wanted to pay tribute to what Berlin had done for the lead, and he wanted to pay tribute with what Stuttgart had contributed to the lead, and he wanted to pay tribute via the study of Italian and melody to what Italy had done in terms of the vocal line and song. And he wanted actually to write songs that he'd also heard of enormous power from Beethoven and Mozart. He knew his Abendempfindung. He knew his Veilchen, but he also knew those 1810 songs. And like, for example, the Beethoven lieder, Wonne der Wehmut, for example, which comes from 1809-10. These songs were known to him. And there were other people in Vienna who were also publishing songs. And although they weren't of the level, Konrad in Kreutzer is one name. There was an element there of him wanting to gather all the forces that excited his teenage and wonderfully subtle mind and make a composite, not composite, sometimes strophic, sometimes ballad, sometimes free, sometimes not free. And all of this is conscious. It's like, I want to master every aspect of the form. Do you think that would be true, Susan? Or is that anywhere near how you see it?
Absolutely. I also wanted to point out that programming for public concerts in Vienna of the early 19th century, everywhere in the early 19th century, is very different from modern conceptions of programming. It's another kind of omnium gatherum. You would start a program with an opera overture, say one of the Mozart opera overtures, and then you would end the program with a symphony or with another bookended opera overture. In between, you would have arias from the Creation or from an opera. You would have improvisations on the harp. You would have lieder. You would have choral music. And you would have movements from chamber pieces. It really was a potpourri of works, so that if you didn't like one genre, another one might appeal to you. And several, at least, of Schubert's songs were first performed on these kinds of programs. And famous singers like Annemilde Hauptmann would solicit Schubert for songs, although she was a little bit obnoxious about it because she didn't want any of his profound, intellectual, deep works. She wanted something that would please the public.
Well, she wanted pieces that would show off her gymnastic skills and her virtuosity. And God forgive her, I mean, she was a very important artist and a very substantial figure. And Schubert adored her and had done from a teenager, as in the Iphigenie operas. But basically, she actually thought that the first Zuleika was just too full of beauty for the public, as if beauty was something that actually, you know, it's all very well, but where do I stand when so much beauty is coming out? And I mean, so he very kindly did the second Zuleika, which is a much more difficult to play and very much more difficult to sing in an acrobatic sense, with its high B flat and with its, you know, it's got a proper galop at the end. I mean, it really does fit the bill in terms of a show-off piece.
Different mood and atmosphere altogether.
Yeah.
Whereas the first Zuleika song, I'm with Brahms, who said that the final passage of Zuleika 1 was one of the most beautiful things Schubert ever wrote.
But there you see, Susan, it's absolutely true that it is one of the greatest things he ever wrote, but it's inconceivable that something of that brilliant architecture, which builds from a murmur of the east wind coming with a message to a great climactic point, and then to a moment of a delicious detumescence at the end. This is only possible, and also in the key of B minor, if you know that at the same time he is thinking of the unfinished symphony in the same key. And it's a scale of song, just like Der Zwerg, which is one of those extraordinary ballads with a real architecture, that in a sense could only have come from the hand of someone who was not a petit maître. He was not like Robert Franz, for example. Now, Robert Franz is a marvelous song composer, but a song composer is all he is. And Schumann, of course.
Genuine miniaturist.
What?
Robert Franz is a genuine miniaturist.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's a not dishonorable thing to be.
No.
Miniatures are not easy to cut, facet, and polish, but it's not the same thing.
Well, I mean, Nicholas Hilliard was a great Elizabethan millionist, but he isn't Titian. I mean, not that you would say. I mean, I'm not decrying the songs of Robert Franz, and many people dropped him in the end because they'd hoped that after just writing songs, he was going to give them something big. He was going to give them something substantial. But the different thing is that Schubert did. He gave the E flat major mass, and he gave these extraordinary, still underestimated big operas, and he gave amazing symphonies, and he gave gigantic string quartets and piano pieces. I mean, Schubert is a master who doesn't actually, I don't think he thinks, and here Brendel wrote something very interesting quite recently. He doesn't think in pianistic vocal terms. He thinks right from the beginning in bigger terms, so that the piano and voice are actually structural in a way that the piano is not, in the case of, say, Chopin, who's actually an entirely piano-orientated composer. And in many ways, Schumann started off as an entirely piano-orientated composer and had to actually work very hard to free himself from that. But right from the beginning, Schubert is thinking in terms of orchestral staves and shapes and plans, and the piano writing, marvelously eloquent though it is not the result of vapid improvisation at the keyboard. It is precisely planned and amazingly detailed, exactly as if he was writing in a string quartet or a symphony. And that is what actually makes the songs immortal, because they are constructions. And I think it's part of our job as pianists and performers to temper some of our enthusiasm and our rubati-rich fascinations in order to try and find a truthful construction.
And can we please stop ending every song with a slight retard, as if wrapping it up in a sweet little bow and saying, "Oh, isn't that lovely?" Just finish the bloody song and let it go. Well, Susan, you wanted to say that. Susan, come on in. You have bring in.
Say is that I think it works the other way around as well, because I think Schubert sought to be as great as Beethoven in a different way, using a set of different formal principles in his piano sonatas. And one of those innovations is having the architecture of a piano sonata first movement include lyric song forms, so that you start off with something that's really a fully finished ABA lyric song, but for keyboard and with the special pianistic writing. I think it's a way in which the lyrical mindset shapes the piano sonatas. All you have to do, think of the beginning of the B flat. And that first sort of fully formed song passage. So I think that there is a fungible boundary between song and the giant compositions that Schubert crosses over in both directions.
Doesn't actually Beethoven also do that sometimes? There's some extraordinary things. For example, you mentioned
at the end.
Look at the opening of the Schubert sonata you mentioned. I often hear the seraphic opening of the Archduke in the same key, superimposed on that, because it has in exactly the same, more or less the same tempo. It's got.
If either one of you are singing at a piano, don't hesitate to demonstrate these themes. Otherwise, I'm going to have to edit this entire conversation with musical. And they were talking about this.
Well,
the B-flat sonata, and let everybody go home and drop it. IDAGIO.com, by the way, has all of Schubert's everything on it. So all you have to go IDAGIO.com, streaming, go to the B-flat sonata. You can even put in B-flat sonata, probably B with flat sonata, and you'll find it. What is the number of the B-flat sonata?
D960.
There you go, D960. Just put in D960. Seriously, I'm kidding. I'm not kidding. I'm not going to take the time for screaming. D960, and IDAGIO was going to bring you that sonata. Anyway, it's great. And when you're playing it, on the right-hand side, it'll give you every other performance in the database of that. So just a little shout out for IDAGIO. It's a wonderful streaming platform. Guys, I don't want to keep you too long, but I want to get to a couple of, not that we haven't had specifics, but I think it would be great fun to have you both sort of venture into the weeds of some songs. And the method one to my madness is that I've sent you the programs that will be performed this week or over next week from the 18th. And I've asked, ladies and gentlemen, I've asked both Graham and Susan to pick a couple of songs that they feel they would like to speak to in a kind of synthesis detail, as if setting it up for the performance. And you can carry this within your mind when you come visit the recital. We'll make all of this more apparent to you, but we're going to have some fun with it. Graham, you wrote back. I'm as much as I want to, you can do all of them if you like, but I don't want to. You picked out Delfine and Florio, which is D857, written in 1825 by Schütz. And I'm telling you, as many songs as I've been teaching, I don't know these two songs. So I'm really quite anxious to hear you talk about them. Why did you want to do, and you called them the Lacrima pair.
Lacrimas, the Lacrimas. Lacrimas is a play that played in Vienna by a man called Schütz, who was a protege of August von Schlegel.
Right.
And actually, Schütz was a rather interesting character. He was and here is something, do we want a bit of black humor in the middle? Schütz was the doctoral dissertation subject, and Susan knows who. Dare I mention it, Susan?
Yes, of course.
Schutz was the person whose doctoral literary dissertation was written by Goebbels, who got his doctorate as a result of writing about Schutz.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Although Schutz cannot be, I don't think, tainted by his association with people who lived after him.
Please tell me it's not Schutz's fault.
Well, the reason why, there's a very wonderful Scena for Delphina, who was a captured princess, who turns out to be a princess, and it's all very oriental and all very slave girl and all very sensual. And it's a marvelous, marvelous song. It's often chosen, by the way, by sopranos for the wrong reason, because at the end it's got one of Schubert's very rare high Cs.
Oh, there you are.
And people look at it and say, yeah, that's the one for me. Because actually, and then they proceed to do it too fast and too violent. She's a girl trembling on the edge of sexual awakening. And she is longing to be taught how this all works. And it's full of subtlety, full of the most marvelous articulation in Schubert's blessed key of A major. It's quite a long song. And its companion piece, Florio, the man masquerading as a gardener, who is really the man who will end up marrying Delphina, is also a marvelous 3 pages, one of the most underestimated Schubert songs. It's very, very beautiful. Sometimes I've heard it sung by women, but really it does need a man and woman conjunction. The Florio is a much...
I believe we're going to hear it in a woman's recital, are we not?
Yeah. Well,
and I believe she's changed the order, or she does Florio first and then Delphine.
Well, I can understand that from a musical point of view, but my point, because let's face it, Delphine is with that high C at the end. I mean, you don't want to go and do Florio. It appears a little bit of an afterthought. But the reason why I mentioned it is that I think it gives us a window into where Schubert might have been going had he had more years in his life. This idea of taking a play or a ballad, like, for example, Lady of the Lake of Walter Scott. In the case of Lady of the Lake of Walter Scott, he provides in his Opus 52 7 songs, 3 for soprano, the Ellen songs, the famous ones, 1 for tenor, Norman, 1 for Malcolm Graham, the Hunter, and 3 choruses, 2 choruses. A Bootgesang, which in its early setting in America became Hail to the Chief, because those are the words still heard presidentially. That 1825 setting of Hail to the Chief, that's from Walter Scott, Lady of the Lake, and a Coronac, which is a chorus for 3 women. What I'm trying to say is that Schubert was constantly thinking of finding ways that songs could, in a sense, do something other than just be lost. It's what I call the impetus to cycle, the idea of making songs tell something significant. And in the case of the Walter Scott and in the case of these 2 Lacrimas, instead of having the film of the play or the film of the book, you get the songs of the play and the songs of the book, and an encapsulation of a hit theatre piece via song. And in the case of the Lady of the Lake, a sort of highlights of the entire noble canto of Scott encapsulated in song. And it seems to me that if Schubert had lived, other plays might have been chosen. We had Die Ahnfrau with Berthas Lied in der Nacht is from Die Ahnfrau, but that actually is an earlier song from 1819, and these pieces are from the 1820s. Schubert might have thought that one of his ways of doing cycles is honing into a successful piece of theatre and doing, as it were, a set of music so that people would feel that their memories of that play were somehow encapsulated musically. And I think that the Lacrima set is sort of unique apart from the Walter Scott, and we would have seen more of it. I think it's where his mind was going. I think I think he was thinking of various ways that he could group his songs and market his songs, and actually also attract the public's attention, and also make a real contribution to mirroring a cultural event such as Lacrimas was on stage. So that's that.
That's fascinating. I thank you. I'm looking forward to the songs. There's so many things I would love to drill down at, but I just don't want to hang you guys up too long. Susan, what song did you want to drill down on for a minute?
Well, first, let me say, Graham, I love that, because I'm trying to argue that Schubert knew Grillparzer's play, even though it wasn't the source of the text he used for Bertha's Lied in der Nacht. But I'm crawling out on a thin limb of speculation to argue that aspects of the music only make sense in light of the drama and knowledge of the drama. I'm having an indecent amount of fun with this particular project. But
well, when your site gets on a song, it's going to be illumined one way or another. There's no doubt about it. to our advantage. So, goodness me, if only life was long enough to get the Susan Youens treatment for all 700 songs, that would be my ideal.
I agree. So are we gonna have Grillparzer now, or are we gonna have the fish song, the Graupe in dem Tartarsus?
I think we're going to have the Groper in the tartar sauce.
Graupe mit Tartarsauce. Gruppe aus dem Tartarsauce.
I'm going to have trouble being properly serious for a
Yes, here we go. Right.
Song. Okay. This is a song that's always fascinated me as an aspect of Schubert's very complex response to Mozart. The very first time I heard this song, which was composed in September of 1817 as a second attempt, he had tried the previous year, and aside from getting himself into hot water with parallel fifths, maybe you can break the rules in hell, I don't know. But he went back to it the next year and produced what, in my opinion, is the greatest of his Antiken Lieder, the songs of antiquity. One of his close friends was Johann Meyerhofer, who was enamored of Greek and Roman classical literature. He was within a culture that was rediscovering ancient Greece and Rome. And in particular, Goethe, Schiller, and Meyerhofer provided him with fodder for these Antiken Lieder. And Gruppe aus dem Tartarus is just an awe-inspiring work. Schiller wrote it in 1780 when he was 21 years old. He was working on his first successful drama, The Robbers, at the time, and the kind of almost excessive emotional expression that you find in that play also bleeds into this text, which presents a group of souls being forced or impelled along the passageway into Tartarus. They are what is called eidolon, E-I-D-O-L-O-N, and that's like a shadow projection of the person. And they're going to the worst of all possible places. They are crossing the river of lamentation, Chromaticism, and going into Tartarus, which is surrounded, according to one of the earliest Greek writers, Hesiod, by a great wall of bronze. And within that great wall of bronze, you can fall for a year and never reach the bottom. That's a description that always makes me sick at my stomach just to read it.
Rightfully so.
It's where the worst of the worst go to eternal damnation. So when I first heard this song, when I was young and stupid, I was immediately reminded of the damnation of Don Giovanni at the end of that opera, the final portion of the Act 2 finale. And, you know, Dante tells us that hell has a very rigid architecture. So both Mozart and Schubert have ordered Armageddons that are masterpieces of compositional rigor. And the thing that struck me when I went back to those two pieces of music years later and began delving into them is that both of them are based on what's called nested chromaticism, smaller chromatic scales within larger chromatic scales. And this comes from a Baroque tradition that the compositional treatises call the passus duriusculus, a harsh passage. That was their term for a chromatic scale. And it was appropriate for eine traurige Musik, sad music. So what Mozart does is mind-boggling, because in the upper reaches of the orchestra, you have what I call the slithering scales motif. And yes, that's a technical, theoretical term. And the scales go up, then down, as they rise a semitone each time. And the scales are different. They're a veritable history of scales and modes from antiquity to 1788. So it's not only proving that you can go to hell by many different pathways, but over many different eons of time. It's conceptually, it's one of the most brilliant things any of us have ever encountered. And I think Schubert was bowled over by it and asked himself, is it possible, I wonder, to produce more chromaticism within chromaticism than you find in that Mozart finale? And I think he did it. The very beginning, you have a rising chromatic scale figure that itself rises by chromatic degrees. And each of the architectural sections of the song is another variation on how to do nested chromaticism, leading to a blaze of C major when Saturn's scythe is broken. Saturn began as the Greek Kronos, who, for siding with the Titans in the war between the gods and the Titans, was thrown into, where else? Tartarus. And what Schiller does is blend Saturn's scythe with the Christian Grim Reaper's scythe. And what happens at the end is that eternity breaks the scythe. It's this dreadful moment of clarity when the souls realize there's no going back. So Schubert refers to the und es ward Licht, blaze of clarity in the creation for another instance, this time of the horrific sublime rather than the glorious sublime.
Wonderful.
I just think it's such a, one of the things that always bowls me over about Schubert is that conceptually these songs are astonishing, and delving into any one of them produces a different match of musical concepts to poetic concepts. He was just an inexhaustible font of this kind of thing.
That's amazing. That's wonderful, Susan. That's just absolutely wonderful. Oh my goodness.
And
So, ladies and gentlemen,
it goes back to that extraordinary thing that Schubert was so sentient. He digested, heard so many things that he processed in his own way. He had this incredible processor of everything that he was privileged to hear and understand and bring out in his work, having understood and translated. I mean, in a sense, this is a person who not only has the genius of creation, but the genius of listening, appreciating and taking in. And actually a lot of very extraordinary, great creative people don't take in that way, but he took it in before he put it out again.
And the
that's a
result
wonderful point.
is amazing, because he will recall a piece of music he wrote earlier, and he will subject it to a rethinking, a recycling, a reprocessing years later. I can't talk about Berthas Lied in der Nacht without also talking about Schwestergruß. And Schubert does this kind of thing constantly.
I love it. Guys, I mean, you're just, this is amazing. If you don't mind, can we just go on a little bit longer?
Sure.
Have you got this? Have you got the stamina? Something you said earlier, Graham, about this cyclic and building of connection in that he was passionate about and searching through. Is that in some way to understand this? How we look at Schubert chronologically through the Otto Erich Deutsch numbers, the D numbers, or the phenomenon, or the whatever you want to call it, the process that Schubert revisited his songs in the middle 20s and started creating for his publishing projects and republished them in opus numbers. And there's been a lot of discussion, or is always a lot of discussion about the idea that if Schubert put those 5 songs together in an opus number, that those songs should perhaps be performed together in that opus number. And that can, in some cycles, as you referenced in the Opus 52, there's a certain logic to the whole thing as a gestalt. I suppose you could, I don't know if the Kosegarten made it into, I don't want to confuse things here, but there are little hidden cycles in his repertoire that we all look at and are fascinated by. But this idea of how do you think we should, what's the proper way to just have a relationship in our own mind about D numbers, Deutsch numbers, Otto Erich Deutsch, or opus numbers, which were published in most of it in his lifetime, or I guess most of it in his lifetime. Anyway,
105 or 106 in his lifetime. Yeah.
I got to 105 in his lifetime, right? I mean, in fact, we're experimenting a little bit with that in the Schubert week, the Stipendiatenkonzert on Sunday, the 24th in the afternoon. The young artists that will be working with me all week, and the other teachers as well, they will be singing in pure opus number structure, which is going to give us some wonderful sort of contrary kinds of songs bumping against one another, but for no didactic reason other than just exploring and having a way to talk about these opus numbers.
I mean, firstly, you mentioned those
Please.
Scott songs of Opus 52.
Yes.
You'd have to have an extraordinary concert to actually get a soprano and 3 women choral singers and a group of male singers and a baritone and a tenor, all willing to trot out one after the other and do it. I have actually done that on occasion.
Yes, I accept the challenge. We'll do it next year, and you should come, and you can come help us.
But all I can say is this: Schubert was given the chance to publish his songs relatively late in life, age 24. And it was due to the activation of the Sonnleitner friends and Spaun and people, originally rejected by Diabelli, who's said to have said, "I've never seen such rubbish in my life as this music, gentlemen. But if you're prepared to pay for it, I will publish it on commission, and you can sell it. You can sell it at your little gatherings and see what good it does you." And of course, the swine, because I think he was a particularly unscrupulous businessman in many ways, bought back the copyrights when he saw that the public's hunger for Schubert was enormous. But the point is this: Opus 1 is Earl King, because it was the most famous, and that's a standalone song. Opus 2 is standalone as well, because it's Gretchen. Then there come 3, and it's often Goethe-orientated. There's an opus that is Meyerhofer-orientated and dedicated to the poet much later. And then there are various things where you could talk about a water imagery, perhaps, or whatever. It doesn't actually apply to every one of the opuses. Some of the opuses were purely opportunistic. Right. Some of the opuses were what Brahms did. As you know, he would actually look in his drawer and come out with songs that were 5, 6, 7 years old and put them with songs that he'd done last week, sort of making an acceptable, contrasting sheaf offering so that a person turning it through finds contrast. The big question here is whether or not what is to be published as something charming on the page and appropriate when grouped together is to be put automatically into another medium of sound. That's the challenge. Yeah. And let me put it this way: there's not a single instance of a Schubert opus number being performed together in his lifetime, apart from, say, something like Schöne Müllerin in private or whatever, that had a narrative reason to be published together. But even then, Schöne Müllerin was so often excerpted and very, very little done together, until Stockhausen is the man who decided to start pulling things together and making groups. Julia Stockhausen, Brahms's friend.
Well after Schubert's death is the complete performance of Die Schöne Müllerin.
Yeah.
And of course, the French, when they discovered Schubert, they would pluck individual songs out of Winterkaiser and stick it into a potpourri volume.
If I'm not mistaken, Julia Stockhausen was the first performer, man, of the Frauen lieben und leben with Clara Schumann, the woman, at the piano. I rather like that. So much for genres. Go ahead.
In a sort of a way, actually, that's also true of Johann Michael Vogel, who sang Ave Maria, which is the third of Ellen's songs. And he actually...
I've sung Ave Maria. We all sing Ave Maria. Well, don't take Ave Maria from us. Like, come on.
But what I'm trying to say is that is actually Ellen's Dritter Gesang. And actually, it's such a great song that Schubert had nothing against Vogel singing it, and it made a huge impression on their holiday together in 1825.
And in the play, it's actually it is a song, isn't it?
Yes, and
it's her song.
And her father accompanies her on the harp.
Right.
And in a sense, that's one of the reasons why we know that Walter Scott had read his Wilhelm Meister's Lehrjahre, because Ellen is nothing other than a Nachfolger of Mignon, and the father who plays the harp is nothing other than a follower of the harper in Wilhelm Meister. I mean,
well, listen, but Lady of the Lake, is a little bit on the better side of the tracks. I think by the time we get into the Harfner world, and poor Mignon, she breaks my heart every time we sing her songs. I mean, what a poor waif. I hope Ellen was slightly happier in her life. And by the way, Graham, accept the challenge. I think I really have a dream. I want to stage in the Schubert week the Lady of the Opus 52, and I'll find a way to do it.
Right.
Be fun.
Well, I think, yeah, but it's one of those things that singers are persuaded to do it if they've got something else to do in other parts of the concert. As long as you don't actually pension off the poor tenor after only one appearance, as Norman in Norman's Kazan.
Yes, well, exactly.
I mean, I think that the whole thing of taking certain opus numbers, I think, does work.
Right.
And it can work in performance, but I think for us to imagine that Schubert wanted them to lie together on the page, because basically it was very important for both poets and composers to present a garland that made sense in the delectation. The actual transfer of those pages onto a living tableau vivant was something that I believe they would have found an altogether more unfamiliar prospect. Maybe not unwelcome, I'm not saying, who knows, but in terms of how concerts were organized, it would have been unfamiliar.
Susan, any thoughts?
There's a life on paper and a life in performance.
That's a huge point.
Schubert was very conscious of the differences between the two. I just wanted to say as well that I think Opus 1 is the most astonishing publishing debut of them all. And I'm sure that Schubert was aware that he was throwing a very giant boulder into the relatively placid, relatively small pond of song composition with that first published work.
And one of the things that I think, Tom, that we should actually also realize, that as soon as Schubert put an opus number to anything, in his earlier opusness, he gives us even metronome marks. You know, that some of those early opuses are the only pieces that have his own metronome marks. But actually, what he does, as soon as something comes up for publication, he takes it out of the drawer and titivates it. So actually, anything that was set for publication gets a certain amount of work, not only before it goes to the publisher, but in that disappeared phase of what the Germans called Fahnen, or proofs. You know, some of the most wonderful corrections in Winterreise were those that were done after the manuscript had been sent to Tobias Haslinger. Once he'd got the proofs back, and he changed and simplified certain things on those proofs, which were then sadly thrown away, those proofs. And so consequently, when you actually look at Winterreise printing and you look at Winterreise manuscript and say, why doesn't this match up? It's because you've actually ignored the fact that there's a phase in between where Schubert himself has corrected proofs. And the wonderful thing about the opus numbers is that because they were published in his lifetime, they reflect more exactly what he wanted than some of the pieces that were half abandoned, not prepared for publication, left in manuscript, forgotten at people's houses. So that what is special about the opus numbers is that they are more finely worked and prepared than many of the other songs that simply remained and discovered years later or never were printed. And I always think that there are certain pieces that never achieved publication that would have, if he'd gone through the publishing process with them, had he been given another 10 years, there would have been some very interesting revisions. And finally, there's the element of the Schöne Müller, which has got so many mistakes in the first edition, because he left poor brother Ferdinand to read the proofs, because he himself was in zealots. And Ferdinand was a dear man and very nice, but, you know, his grief in life was to be a second-class musician in comparison to his brother. and also quite a lazy man, I think. And
we can't choose our family.
Well, he was very fond of Ferdinand indeed, but Ferdinand made a terrible job. And then Leidersdorf, the publisher of Schöne Müllerin, made a terrible job. And of course, Schöne Müllerin sunk without trace, largely because it was published in different installments over a long period of time, and nobody noticed it, you know? And that's one of the sad things.
Oh my goodness, what a wonderful long hour. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, if anybody ever tried to tell you that the world of song is somehow rarefied and absent from connectivity to life, just laugh, shrug your shoulders and walk away. Probably you can't change their mind, but as you can see, the depth and connectivity of where all of these inspirations from text and poets and times and epochs and philosophers and sensitivities and aesthetics that form themselves into a 3-minute encapsulated snapshot of humanity through the genius of a Franz Schubert is truly one of the most glorious gifts to humanity that creation can give us. Yes, you may say anything, Jeff.
One thing that it strikes me about Schubert being present at this age of the world and nothing new in the world. He was in his childhood, aged 6 or 7, when there was a major and terrible strife in the US Congress between choosing Thomas Jefferson versus Aaron Burr. And the Congress had to choose one or the other. And I'm absolutely amazed, not only did Schubert love, the amazing novels of Fenimore Cooper with Natty Bumppo and the leather stocking, but actually, it's amazing to me that Franz Schubert might have known very well the name Thomas Jefferson. He certainly knew all about the Iroquois Indians and
quite.
And I think it would be, and here's an idea for you. When you next do Winterreise, bear in mind that Schubert's hero, Natty Bumppo from The Last of the Mohicans, was a voluntary outcast who follows the wilderness on a Western trail. Now, how about Winterreise as an American folk hero of the West? That's an idea that's never been explored.
I'll get my string tie and cowboy hat and my cowboy boots are very fancy.
Yes.
You're speaking from my. It's a wonderful. It's absolutely. I mean, this is our next conversation. Susan, what do you think about something like that?
I could listen to Graham talk about Schubert.
It's true. It's true.
Years straight. I always learn so much.
I'm just saying that you two great American Schubertians, I mean, we sent Oscar Wilde and we sent Charles Dickens to America to wonder at the melting pot that it was. And of course, it is still a melting pot in many ways. We won't go there. But to an extraordinary extent, the ups and downs and the vicissitudes of even American politics are something that are within Schubert's purview and within his own time. So his time is still our time.
Apropos melting pot, we're slightly more melting than pot at the moment, but never mind. But like you say, we're not going to go there. Susan, jump. What do you want to say?
I just wanted to say that Schubert has been my consolation over these past 4 years of utter insanity and cruelty. So I hope that in the days to come, we shall all be a bit more worthy of Schubert.
I was visiting some colleagues. I was doing a concert in, I'm not going to say where, I'm just going to tell you it was a very much a populist nationalist regime in its budding and already showing significant non-liberal attitudes towards the arts in a society that didn't embrace the arts very much anyway in Central Europe. And I found myself offering some sort of, I was asked to speak to them to give them some sort of consolation and some sort of, after our concert, and bolstering up. And I found myself referring immediately and unhesitatingly to Schubert. And I said, if it's possible for Schubert to have the life he had with the friends he had in the world that they lived, we're going to be fine.
Well, bravo.
And we all drank and cried and said that must be true. I hope it's true. You two are amazing. I mean, sometimes I love being a fly on the wall, and I can listen to both of you talk in summation and detail. And I hope I have the privilege to invite you often, and that you will accept to come. I know our public is incredibly grateful to have this private, direct moment with you two great thinkers and great scholars with your vast experience. I hope I've tried to ask questions that pulled your chatty Cathy cord, and I think we've had some wonderful moments, and I can't thank you enough. Ladies and gentlemen, it is January. It is Schubert month. As long as I live, for me, it will be Schubert month. And we've just gotten started. Do join us next week. In a week, I'm going to have Christopher Gibbs and Morten Solvik as guests. And that's going to be a lot of fun too. So, and by the way, during the week, there's a Tuesday during the week we're in Schubert. We're going to be as we say in German, live dabei. You're going to meet a lot of wonderful young singers in the throes of their Schubert studies, and the week will be behind scenes at the Boulez Saal for the Schubertiade. In the same way, in March, we'll be behind the scenes at the Lied Academy in Heidelberg. There's nothing more important to me today than passing on whatever I can and helping my colleagues pass it on. It is all about the next generation. It's all about the next singers of all ethnic backgrounds, embracing song, singing, and the joy of sharing the human spirit in music with one another. And that's what we do, and that's what we're going to keep doing. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for participating. Beyond Song, Hampson Foundation, and thank you very much, IDAGIO.com. Yes, stream Schubert tomorrow morning. You'll feel better. Thank you, Graham, and thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.
Good night. Good night, everybody. Thank you very much.